Well, back here, we have members of the public ready to tell us which option sounds best to them. We'll hear from Layla Moran backing a second referendum, from Marcus Fysh from the European Research Group. He believes any deal or no deal is better than this. Nicky Morgan, who's behind a Norwegian-style EFTA agreement if the PM's deal fails. Bill Esterson, Labour's business minister, who believes a vote of no confidence, then a general election, would allow them, Labour, to negotiate a better deal. But we start with the Education Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, who's backing the PM's deal. Welcome, Nadhim. Your minute starts when you reach the lectern.
Thank you very much. Before entering Parliament, I built a business in the UK and across Europe and the rest of the world. I voted for Brexit because I think Europe is heading towards a single budget, still believes in free movement, and, of course, let's talk of a single European army, which I don't think the British people will buy into. Why is this deal the right deal? Because I think this deal is a compromise. It's uncomfortable, but it's uncomfortable for both sides. What does it do for us? It allows us to take back control over free movement, of course, but then also fishing and farming, and allows us to trade confidently with Europe and trade confidently with the rest of the world. The two other extremes, rerunning the referendum, will be divisive and will tear the country apart. And a disorderly Brexit, I think, will hurt the economy and hurt jobs and make people poorer. And that's not what they want us to do, which is why I think it's the right thing to back the Prime Minister and deliver this deal, which actually safeguards jobs, but delivers on the promise we made, the instruction we had from the British people, that we must leave the European Union. That is why this is the right deal. It'll define the country for the next 100 years. And you have to think very carefully, including all my colleagues in Parliament, which is why I think when they scrutinise this deal, they will back it.
Nadhim Zahawi, thank you very much. Nadhim there, backing the government's deal. He is Theresa May for the purposes of tonight. Marcus Fysh, we're going to invite you up next. Marcus Fysh represents the ERG position. That's say any deal is better than this deal, possibly even no deal. Marcus?
Well, this is a historic moment in our country. We have to not give in to fear, and we have to do the best for the people who rely on us in Parliament to get a good arrangement with the EU, but operate as separate jurisdictions. There is nothing wrong with leaving without a withdrawal agreement. We actually can have lots of side agreements. We can do a zero-for-zero tariff and quantities deal as a provisional deal. But the one thing we mustn't do, though, is shackle ourselves to the EU permanently, which is what the government is proposing. What it's proposing gives massive hostages to fortune in the future. It's a permanent arrangement whereby they could control what our trading arrangements are, whether we have freedom of movement, money. It's a really, really bad deal, and almost anything is better than this, and I certainly won't be supporting it. And we need to reset these negotiations and stand up to the EU. When I've been to the EU and talked to member states, they've said they would love to help the UK achieve that, but while we've got a government that is insisting on capitulating and insisting on this high alignment model, they've got no basis on which to go to the Commission and help us do it.
Gently catching your eye, Marcus Fysh. Thank you very much indeed. Let's invite Nicky Morgan now. Nicky is going to vote with the government, but recognises that if it doesn't go through, it may be that an amendment is needed. Just describe what you are now recommending, Nicky.
Well, good evening, and thank you for all being here and being so interested. And I think this really matters, this vote that we're going to have. I think, as Nadhim has said, that no negotiated agreement is ever going to be perfect. No side is going to like it. It's always going to involve a compromise. I will be supporting the Prime Minister in that agreement when it's presented to the House of Commons. I'd like to think that it's going to go through. But if it doesn't, then I think a responsible government has to have a plan B. And that plan B that I believe can command a majority in the House of Commons is something like the Norway model, Norway Plus, which involves access to the single market via EFTA, the UK was a founder member of EFTA. It would mean we leave the common fisheries policy, the common agricultural policy. We would be leaving the EU as a former Remainer. That might pain me to say it, but that is what people voted for. 17 million voted for change in June of 2016. It would also mean we had to be part of a customs arrangement which would deal with the issue of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. But we wouldn't need the backstop, which is what is causing so much angst amongst my colleagues and many MPs across the House of Commons. It would be a way forward to make sure that we do leave the EU, we don't crash our economy, we respect what people voted for in June of 2016. And for those reasons, as I say, I hope that the deal does get through the Prime Minister has put on the table. If it doesn't, there has to be a plan B that avoids a catastrophic no-deal Brexit.
Nicky, thanks very much. Nicky Morgan then offering a plan B to the government's first attempt at the vote. And Bill, I'm going to invite you up now. Bill Esterson is speaking for Labour as their business minister, and you're going to tell us, Bill, why you need something more radical than the deal itself.
Well, thank you very much, Emily, and good evening to everyone. The Conservatives have had 2 years to sort out a deal, and they can't even negotiate with themselves, let alone with anybody else. And the result is a deal that is neither fish nor fowl. It fails to deliver frictionless trade or any kind of support for services. It fails on workers' rights and on the environment. It fails on national security. And of course, it fails to prevent a hard border in Ireland. So Labour will be voting against this deal, and we will be doing everything we can to stop a hard Brexit, no deal as well. That's very, very important. We think there's an alternative. We think there's a much better way forward, a way that can unite Leave voters and Remainers, that can start to heal the divisions in our country. And that arrangement is a comprehensive new customs union combined with a single market deal that delivers common regulations, common standards, and uses the common institutions with the EU. That's a way forward. It's a way of healing the divisions and bringing the country back together again. And the government should come forward with it and get agreement on it in the House of Commons.
Bill, thanks very much indeed. And Layla Moran is going to tell us why we need a second vote, a second referendum.
Well, thank you for doing this. And I think it's quite simple. We were told that this deal is it. The Prime Minister has told us this is all that we've got. And I don't think that there is anything better than putting it to the people to ask, is this what you really wanted? Because as we've seen from tonight, there isn't a consensus in Parliament for even if Parliament wants this deal. It pleases nobody. It's a deal that makes us poorer and makes us rule takers, but not rule makers. The question then has to be, is this what you voted for? And if it isn't, then we need to have the option to remain in the EU. This is the comparison we need to make. This deal that Theresa May has brought back, or the current deal that we've already got. And to those who say, oh, just get on with it. Believe me, I am as bored as everyone else with Brexit. Let's just talk about something else. Look at this deal. 26 pages at the end that say a vague political declaration. This Canada deal is nearly 1,600 pages long. So if you think that this deal represents the end of Brexit and we can get on with it, don't be fooled. It's not the end. It's the start of more talk about Brexit for maybe another decade to come.
Layla Moran, thank you very much. Have a seat. We're going to hear now from... you all held your concentration incredibly well then. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that we packed into 5 minutes, and we'll invite our MPs, the politicians, to answer any of your questions. Darren, I'm going to start with you. Our audience, I should say, were with us here on Friday to predict whether the deal on Friday would get the sign-off from the EU this weekend. And many of them are back, a balance of 3 people who voted Remain, 3 who voted Leave, 1 who was a Remainer but is now weighing up different options. And they're going to tell us who's convincing us this time round. So, Darren, who made the most sense to you? Which of these positions would you urge your MP to get behind?
I would put myself behind what Marcus is saying. I believe that what Marcus is saying is the ultimate backstop for the situation where we're currently at. And actually listening to all five of you speak, it was really interesting that, Nadhim, for instance, you spoke about, we're talking about something here that's going to affect our country for 100 years, but it's not a unilateral ability for us to exit this. And there is no Article 50 for this deal. And Marcus, obviously, you talk about this isn't about being scared of a no deal. There's 85% circa of our trade is dealt with on outside of the EU. Some with a great agreement, some on WTO terms. I mean, but all three of you, Nicky, you're backing the deal, but then saying actually you've got a plan B. Actually, I've got little faith in a lot of the positions, unfortunately. But
you have got a little faith in?
No, sorry, I have little faith
okay.
in most of the positions.
So you would say Marcus is the most clear-cut, which is just get out and work it out from there on?
Yeah, I think so. But in the way that actually it will, in my opinion, cause short-term pain. But I believe this deal gives us medium or long-term fundamental constitutional issues in our nation.
Nusrat, you were torn, weren't you? You were torn this time round. I know you were a Remainer. What did you hear?
Yeah, I mean, I want to point towards the two ladies, Layla and Nicky, to say that actually what you say I totally agree with. We need more detail. We're in the situation that we're in because we rushed through without having the information that was necessary to enable us, the public, to make an informed decision. And we're back in that exact same position now where we're rushing through in, is it a week's time where we've got to make another decision without little information?
But there's very different perspectives
there are.
here. So Nicky's basically saying, get behind the PM and then we'll see what happens. And Layla is saying, you were misinformed, let's start again.
Yeah, and I would say in the majority I'm with Layla because, as you say, where's the detail? How you've put a blindfold on people and asking them to make a decision.
Can I ask at this point, who would be more behind Layla and who would be more behind Marcus?
Oh, sorry.
OK, and then go on, you were going to come in.
No, take that back.
Tell us where you are then.
With that lovely gentleman over there, 100%.
So you would want your
100%.
MP to back Theresa May's deal now?
100%.
OK, and there wasn't anything that he said that worried you about a backstop or about Darren's worries that you'd be caught in something that you couldn't get out of?
The reason I'm sitting here and these learned gentlemen and ladies are sitting there is because they know far more about what's going on than we do. We know what we know, but they are members of Parliament for a reason. We're not. So, and being a Conservative, born and bred all my life, I will back Prime Minister May. I just, it's going to be hard for everybody.
Yeah.
It's going to be a rocky boat, but we've just got to sit it out and put faith in the government that we have elected and put faith in the vote that we voted, which was Brexit.
It's probably quite reassuring 2 years after a referendum to see that there is still faith somewhere along the lines in the parliamentary system. I don't know what you would say, Anita, because you would want to go back for a second referendum.
A people's vote. This is such an important decision. It's going to, as everyone has been saying, it's going to affect our generation and every generation for the rest of our lives. And it only seems fair that it goes back to the same people who initially voted for Brexit but who didn't vote for this deal. And we have the right to decide whether this deal is the way forward.
Let me ask you, at some point, each one of these five is asking for a compromise on something. If you go with Layla, you are compromising on democracy, on the purity of the first vote. If you go with Nadhim, you are compromising on, if you like, taking back control, right? At some point, you're not going to get your full control.
But nobody can win.
Right, so you think nobody can win?
The whole thing is going to be a give and take anyway.
What are you prepared, or let me ask Omar, what are you prepared to compromise on? What is your compromise? Is it freedom of movement? Is it the economy, even if it's in the short term?
I think for me, to back up any of the speeches that we've heard, I would say Nicky's deal sounds more, promises that were made before the referendum. Nothing is being delivered. So we need to have a second plan. But when we have a second plan, why should we actually go with the first plan anyway, because that's not working at this moment. So why would you back up the first plan if you already have a second plan which you ought to put forward for?
Now, let's just understand this, Nicky. To get into the EFTA Norway, this would be a compromise on freedom of movement. We would have to allow for freedom of movement, continued
Yes,
freedom of movement?
under the EEA agreement, it's a definition of free movement of workers, not freedom of movement as under the EU agreement. So it is a difference, and there's also an emergency break that can be applied.
But in Norway, if it was the same as Norway, whether it's to live or work, people can come and go throughout the EU. That's what they've signed up to.
They can, but of course we're also going to have a new immigration system whereby we're going to have people registering, so we will know. And I think a lot of people, actually, the concern about immigration was not knowing who's coming here, how long they're coming here for, why they're coming, and when they should be going home. So there's lots more that the UK government proposes to set out in order to control of immigration.
It was the cap on numbers.
Well, fanned by some of the we haven't helped matters, politicians, over the last few decades, in the way that we have spoken about immigration. There's lots more that could be done in order to give people reassurance.
It's been already
but the question
2
you're
years.
asking, sorry, go on.
It's been already 2 years since the referendum has taken place. If we are to go with any deal, could you assure any days or any timeline when exactly it's going to take place, or is it going to continue for the next 4 or 5 years?
Well, the plan would, under, I think various... So the withdrawal agreement obviously potentially gets ratified next month by the UK Parliament. It has to be approved by the EU Parliament. We will leave the European Union on the 29th of March next year, and we enter what's called a transition period. That ends at the end of 2020. Under what I'm... obviously, if we were end up with a Norway, you would go into the EFTA at that stage. I think if the Prime Minister's deal is approved, then actually, hopefully by that point, you've got a new agreement setting out a new trading relationship between the EU and the UK. If that new agreement's not in place, then you end up with this Irish backstop.
Would freedom of movement be a red line for any of you? Would you say we have to end freedom of movement? That's the most important thing. You, Lynn?
Big time.
OK. Angela?
Yes, I think so.
So you would say, I cannot accept, or I would not want to support any Brexit deal that's still allowed for freedom of movement. Is that right?
Exactly.
Darren, you were a leaver, but you were very pro-freedom of movement. Where do you sit now?
Yeah, I mean, I still believe in freedom of movement as a principle, but ultimately the problem is we're always debating about where we're at today and trying to form our opinions on what we really believe in. But the mistakes were made with immigration, like you said, over the previous decades. So it's a really hard question to answer, really. I mean, it's
shutting the gate after the horses bolted.
Immigration was not in any way a top 5 priority of mine for voting to leave, but I appreciate that isn't the case for a lot of leavers.
That's really interesting. So actually, which of our MPs here would say that whichever party you're from, we made a mistake on overselling the negative side of immigration? Who would say to the voters?
Clearly that's the case.
You do. Bill, would you say that Labour overstated the evils of immigration?
Oh, I think we definitely made mistakes in government. The point is, what we've now got is a
not
system...
mistakes in government, but in terms of, do you think broadly there are net ills or net gains from immigration?
Our employers need migration in big numbers for our economy to be successful, for our public services to be successful. The problem now is we have an immigration system that is all about artificial caps when it should be about the needs of employers, and that's the big mistake the current government has made.
It was not just the PM, but obviously the Home Secretary that introduced those caps. Sure. Was that wrong, those numbers?
So, first of all, if we go back to sort of the question you asked earlier, so during the Labour years, when you had the accession countries like Poland coming in, Germany and Italy and France chose a 7-year holiday before they allowed that movement to happen. We didn't. We got the numbers wrong. And I think part of that is people not anti-immigration. I'm immigrant stock to this country. They're anti the rate that it took place so fast and put pressure on low-paid jobs. So the reason I think the Prime Minister is so serious about wanting to have our own immigration policy. So we have people that we want in this country who can, wherever the shortages are, that we want to attract to this country, so that actually you increase productivity, you don't put pressure on the lowest paid people in our country. That's the big driver for part of this deal. But people voted to Brexit on all sorts of reasons.
Well, we're just finding out what some of those are.
But all I'm saying is it's a compromise. At the end of the day, what I'm saying to you here is, look, we've decided that we leave because Europe is moving in a direction which I don't think the British people ever support.
So first of all, we could have always had more checks and balances with freedom of movement. There was always the facility for us to say who could come. They could not stay for more than 3 months without a job. That other countries already do this, and we had that facility. We didn't use it. But it's not just about overplaying the negatives. What we didn't also do is properly talk about the positives of freedom of movement. Now think of the number of NHS workers who are part of our system, all those EU citizens who contribute to our society. They are helping the economy. And politician after government have been complicit in playing up how bad they were. And in fact, we are now seeing the great contribution they made to our society, and it's us who's going to suffer.
The one thing we all agree on is that whatever we go down now will take compromise. So we've talked a little bit about compromise on freedom of movement. What about compromise on the democratic deficit that a second referendum would involve? Who would be willing to see a second referendum? Who believes...
No.
You would? OK, so you don't think that that would be somehow a betrayal of, you know, the way your friends Brexiteers have voted?
No, because things have changed over the past 2 years and we've got a very different position now. There's a very different offer of what Brexit is. We didn't know what Brexit would be when we originally had the first referendum.
Could any of you sell a second referendum?
We've agreed to leave. It's like saying, oh, we don't like it. Can we try again, please?
No, what we agreed was to leave, but what we didn't agree on was that destination.
And
so
that's not our job to agree on the destination. Our job was to say, do we want to be part of the EU or not?
And
I voted to leave.
But the problem with the deal as it stands now is it looks like no one wants it, right? So if you were a Remainer, you recognise it's going to hurt the economy. But if you were a Leaver, they don't want it either.
It's still going to hurt. It's still going to be rocky either way. We're just going to leave it out.
But if you like it, then you can vote for the deal. So but if in the referendum, what we would say is that you've got the deal or you stay in. It's like deleting a computer file. If you say no, I don't really want this, you stay with the file.
Let's just do a quick check. Bill, could you sell a second referendum to your constituents?
Well, I think the thing to do is follow the policy we agreed at our conference, which is a step-by-step approach. We've got to get through these various votes.
Do you think in your heart you could sell them a second referendum?
We've got to get through these votes. I think in time we may well get to a second referendum. That's why we left it on the table.
And it wouldn't be a bad thing?
Well, if that's the right thing for the country at the time, absolutely, yeah. But
Nicky.
the point is to do this thing in the right order.
I do support a second referendum for some of the reasons we've already discussed. I've got lots of people in my constituency who absolutely want there to be a second vote, but at the end of the day, I think we have a representative democracy, exactly as the lady here said, and actually we 650 of us elected in 2017 to take these decisions, to scrutinise the agreement on the table, to listen to what people are saying, and to make that judgment on the 11th of December. If we have enough referendum, we cut across our representative democracy and we would ask questions about, why do we have a parliament?
Darren, I want to bring you in. Go.
Layla, I believe this commentary that comes around a people's vote second referendum is a misnomer when we talk about we didn't know what we was voting for. Because there's an argument for that, and I would counter that argument, but let's look at the here and now. You're proposing, if I understand correctly, that we would have a referendum with a choice of accepting the Withdrawal Act as it currently stands or remaining in the EU.
Yep.
Well, if you take either of those options, both lead us on a path where we do not know where it will end. Because this is a problem with the Withdrawal Act. There's so much ambiguity that look at the discussion, the debates. Will we get our waters back? Can we control this? On what timescales? Will the transition period...
So you prefer no deal versus staying in the EU?
No, hang on, later, one second. So that's one option. The second option to vote to remain. In 20 years, will we be in a single currency? Will there be in a European army? What will the European project look like? This commentary that we do not know where we're going to be applies to every single option.
Applies to the EU if we say so.
But we would at least be at the table to make those decisions.
But Layla,
Layla,
why should we as a public, after having our biggest democratic expression of will, allow our government to mismanage this process for 2 years and to come back and say this is a terrible deal, take it or remain?
OK.
We set a precedent for the
There's one more compromise I want to talk about, which is whether people feel that economically we will be worse off. Can I just ask for a raising of hands? Which of you here can say we will be better off after Brexit?
Absolutely.
3.9%.
Oh, yeah,
OK.
Now, figures.
OK. So for our audience here, if we have short-term economic losses or even longer-term economic losses, is it a price worth paying? Nusrat?
Yes, big time.
No, absolutely not. I mean, moving past our generation onto the next generations that are coming through, I think we'll be paying the price for the decisions that are made in haste, blindly today, for many generations.
Angela, do you disagree with that, or do you think that we won't suffer at all economically? What's your sense?
We probably will suffer. I think to start off with, I think there'll be sort of like growing pains being out there on our own. But everything is unknown. Unless we take the option of trying, how do we know? So,
can I see a raising of hands from our audience here? Who would say it's worth whatever economic pain there is to get on the right or on the Brexit place?
Not whatever, but
No, I mean,
you know, it's worth paying.
I think we're already paying off the prices. I mean, looking at the current economic status, pound value has dropped so dramatically, and everything has just gone. Household expenses has gone up.
It's actually dropped by about the level that a lot of commentators said that the pound was overvalued by, and it's
So the reason I'm backing the Prime Minister's deal is because actually an orderly exit, when you've been married for 40-odd years, you can go for an acrimonious divorce, or you have a friendly divorce. Say, look, we can stay friends, we can trade together, but we're leaving. We don't want
what have they done
so
to
we
show
leave on the
goodwill?
29th of March. Just let me finish this.
Sorry.
I think if we, my instinct as someone who was in business going into politics is if we deliver the Prime Minister's deal, you'll see the markets react positively to that deal, including the pound. You saw it immediately when the markets thought things were not going well, not just financial services and property companies, but retailers got hit immediately. So I think if we have a disorderly Brexit, which is where I think, with all respect, where Marcus is at,
no, it isn't.
That you will hurt the economy.
Okay, he's shaking his head. Let Marcus come in.
That is absolutely not the case. That we can absolutely have a managed situation. When I've looked at the actual numbers behind this, the government's fear-mongering...
What is a managed situation? Do you mean a no-deal Brexit?
No, look, we are going to have a constructive relationship with our EU friends. We are not going to walk off into the Atlantic we don't need a withdrawal agreement to do that. There are lots of side agreements that we can do. Managing our borders is not going to upset our just-in-time supply chains. It's complete fear-mongering by the government. They have overestimated. They've overestimated the non-tariff barrier cost by 15 times in their credit.
We're already having to stop pound medicine.
So there's a lot of disagreement with what Marcus is saying, and yet you are going to walk through the same bit of the lobby in the House of Commons as Marcus.
Well, let's see what happens.
Hang on a minute.
You're going to vote against the government's deal, right?
Well, the RG could yet back down, couldn't they? But, these things tend to happen in government parties.
Could you support Nicky's amendment?
Look, can I answer this? This is absolute nonsense. We saw figures today showing the economy being 3.9% lower as a result of this deal than if we stayed in the European Union.
And without a deal, it was 1.6% less than that. 1.6%.
They are
according
both
to
bad
what you're
deals.
quoting.
They should both be rejected. We need to find an alternative.
This is a mess.
We need to find a better way.
We've got a great opportunity here, and you're just going to waste it.
Not us. People need the final say.
I'm not going to thank you all.
Politicians who have guts.
We've run out of time. Marcus, we've run out.
What people need.
Thank you very much indeed.